It's December 7th, Monday. This will be our final Finance Committee meeting for 2020. I want to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Tonight's agenda for the Finance Committee meeting will be to review the 2021 appropriations budget for both the City of Worcester and the Worcester Community Hospital. We did receive the information from the Worcester Community Hospital over this weekend. I want to thank Scott Boyce for preparing that and finalizing that, and he's here this evening. And while we have a cursory fiduciary responsibility for the hospital, it is noted that they are a separate and quasi-independent financial revenue for-profit enterprise, but it does fall under the city's preview and overview. So we're all aware of that. It is an extensive budget, hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of revenue generation and profitability, significant capital investment, but the Board of Governors, the hospital Board of Directors have the primary fiduciary responsibility for this enterprise operation. So with that being noted, I would like to turn the floor over to Mr. Scott Boyce, the CFO of Worcester Community Hospital, to go through a top-level commentary summary of the 2021 Worcester Community Hospital appropriations budget. The floor is yours, Mr. Boyce.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ansel. And he did ask me to do a cursory review, so I will try to be brief, but certainly ask me questions, follow up with emails, and certainly you can work through Andre in that too. Our Board of Governors met on November 17th for our board's strategic planning and annual budget workshop, as the mayor can attest. We go through quite a bit of detail in that workshop with a PowerPoint presentation which supplements the packet that I know Mr. Doherty included in your budgetary materials. The board approved both the hospital's 2021 operating and capital budgets at the November 25th board meeting. 2020 has been a rough year on hospitals financially, and the CARES Act provider relief funding has been very much appreciated and needed. In the hospital's budget packet, we provided both projected 2020 and budget 2021 operating dollars with and without the CARES Act monies. Page 3 in your packet for the hospital is without the CARES Act monies, and page 4 is with those dollars that we've provided. The overall format of this packet is very similar to what you've seen in prior years, and I know council is a seasoned group and there's nobody new unfamiliar with this. There has been a bit of back and forth on the formula that we will be used to determine how much of the CARES Act monies that Worcester Community Hospital gets to keep. Our latest understanding is that we should be able to keep all of the monies that we've received, and we've received approximately $14.3 million of CARES Act funding. For this budget cycle, we have two key, or as we told the board, anchoring budget assumptions. Number one, we are planning on having an effective COVID-19 vaccine that will be available for wider distribution by the end of the first quarter of 2021, in which consumer confidence we're planning to return to pre-COVID levels. So that's the first key assumption we made when we entered the budgeting season. And I do believe that's going to be true with what we know as today. And then number two, we see the benefit of the health system from our most recent physician recruits. And we have another success, and we are planning to have another successful physician recruiting season, including GI, neurology, adding a PCP, a primary care physician, and an orthopedic surgeon to our system. If you go back to page 1 and 2, you will note the hospital's overall key volume assumptions, which drive these numbers, are quite unusual. We typically don't see huge percentage swings in the projections, but with the closures we experienced in the spring and the delay of care that has been experienced by us and most of the healthcare system in the United States, we think our assumptions are reasonable based upon our two anchoring key assumptions, and we believe they'll hold true. On page 1, you will see that we included dollars for a wage increase in 2021, but we will need to see a few months with net income excluding the CARES Act dollars. So we want a positive bottom line before we go to our board and ask them to formally approve a wage increase, but we included dollars in there for that. And we are hopeful to do that in the April 1 timeframe. You will also note that we built in an annual price increase, even while we are making sure that we keep our prompt pay cash pricing very competitive. Looking at row 38 on page 1, we are budgeting for 2021 bottom line net income to get nearly back to 2019's level without the CARES Act dollars, because we don't believe the CARES Act dollars can be relied on indefinitely. Please note that the dollars required to be approved for the hospital within the city's budget are based on those numbers or the expenditures on page 4, which includes the positive impact from the CARES Act provider relief funds. The hospital budgeted $12,819,500 for the 2021 capital budget. Aside from the exceptional larger capital investments made by the hospital, we tend to target our annual spend close to our annual depreciation expense. For 2021, the budgeted depreciation expense is $10.1 million. 2021's capital is higher than this as we've deferred several larger projects. 2020 has been much lower. Year to date, in fact, in October, our capital spend was $4.2 million, which is quite a bit off pace of our depreciation expense. Our most significant new capital budget items are $1.6 million to bring our EMR, our Meditech system data center back on premise, and that includes adding 2 FTEs. $950,000 to continue to build out the space in the Bell Professional Center, which is the old Western Reserve building. $875,000 to replace all the hospital's cardiac vital sign monitors, and then $400,000 to replace the 1970s central building service elevator. So that's a really quick cursory review of what's in your budget packet. We are optimistic about next year, and we're excited that we hopefully will have an effective vaccine being administered to our staff and our SNF patients by mid-month. Any questions?
Scott, are you seeing similar trends with other healthcare institutions in terms of the variance over the 2020 budget, now the 2020 projected finish? And then are they making the same assumptions that we are making regarding the rebound of normal continuity within the healthcare operations?
Well, it's somewhat varied. We're part of the Quorum Health Resources Managed Hospital Network, so I get the benefit of talking to the regional players there and understand what other hospitals are doing. We're the first calendar year hospital to go through the budgeting process, but I have heard through our regional CFO contact, Sam Brown, that what we're assuming is typical to some, that there will be a return to growth in 2021. The 6/30 year ends, they were kind of caught in the middle of the fire and had less to go by than what we have now, because certainly when we did our anchoring assumptions regarding an effective vaccine, we had to make those assumptions in September and October, and we now know them to be accurate, but we didn't know that as we were trying to land on, the annual budget.
It must have been a very difficult year for the hospital, comparing your trend of positive performance and reasonable, healthy profitability and reinvestment. Just thank goodness for the CARES Relief Act, because without that, it would have been a very challenging year in 2020 for the hospital.
It really would have been. And, we did do, and the mayor can attest to this, we did take proactive actions to reduce our expenses as much as we could. We didn't want to count on the federal dollars to save us, so to speak. So we wanted to manage through. And there's so many unknowns as we were going through this. And even in mid-October, the rules of whether we get to keep the money or not changed a couple of times in the formulas, and the whole industry reacted strongly to that, because folks are trying to finalize their audits and everybody's making assumptions of what's appropriate to accrue and book with these CARES Act monies. But we feel pretty good about the dollars that we received and the ability to keep them.
Well, and as a note, Scott, I believe with reference to that, you've reduced operating expenses compared to the budget by about $8 million. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That is correct. You know, we did try to, as I phrase it, skinny down this year to make sure that we, you know, we're as lean as we could be. And you know, right now, what we had encouraged our staff, which is turning out to be true, is that when the business comes back, it'll come back, you know, strong, and that there will be a lot of opportunities to work. And right now, honestly, you know, we're trying to make sure that we have the right amount of staffing for the volume that we're experiencing, which has been strong beginning really mid-October through now.
Yes, well, and you're anticipating revenue increases of about $54 million over the projected 2020 finish, which is a significant increase. So that certainly is an indicator of your optimism. So good luck, and hopefully this thing will rebound quickly in the first and second quarter.
We, and Mr. Ansel, just so you know, I don't want to give the impression of false optimism. We saw similar decreases in our volumes this year. So rebounding back to pre-COVID levels doesn't seem out of reach when you consider that. And on page 3, if you look at the volume changes, we only have one area where we showed the volume going down, and that's in our Milltown lab. And the reason why is Milltown lab was so very busy this year. When we had to pull our phlebotomists out of the physician offices, we redirected our lab to that location. So we're trying to reflect that change. But, you know, seeing 30% increases in volume for established departments is really unheard of. But we also experienced a similar decrease this year.
Well, thank you. Other members of the Finance Committee, any questions or comments regarding the projected 2021 budget for the hospital? Mr. Myers?
Just trying to unmute there. Oh, I think this is well done, Scott. Always appreciate all the work that you guys put into this and getting this together. I know what a struggle it's been to guess at numbers and forecast budgets with all this mess going on. And looks as though we should be returning to a regular kind of a year, at least toward the latter part of 2021. So hats off to you and your staff. And I know firsthand from talking to some of the other people at the hospital that you guys did take serious efforts at cost reduction. And obviously you've got to maintain a certain level, service level, and for our community. And we appreciate the efforts that you guys have all made. So thank you very much. I don't have any questions at this time going forward. If I come up with anything, Scott, I know where to find you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Mr. Sanders.
I have nothing to add, Mr. Ansel.
Again, Scott, compliments to you and your financial team at the Worcester Community Hospital and the Board of Governors for getting through this very difficult and challenging times of unknown certainties. Again, very conservative in your approach. Your contingency plans that you've noted are reasonable, and certainly you have to have them, and you can execute if things don't rebound as anticipated. Thank you for your proactiveness regarding those contingency plan options in terms of salary increase deferments and also capital spending. You guys are very fiscally responsible, and I think we have a very strong budget proposal here. And again, just for the public reference, we're talking about revenues exceeding $300 million for the total operating revenues for the Worcester Community Hospital. Quite a significant business enterprise when you're looking at $300 to $350 million in revenue. So thank you for your detail and your courtesy of presenting this to council. We will move to include this for adoption this evening. I will open the floor up to other participating council members. appreciate their participation in this important meeting this evening. So with that, would anyone like to make any comments or provide feedback or input into our discussion this evening?
John, can I come in for a second?
Yes, Councilman Bostancic, certainly, please.
I want to make sure on page 4, I'm on the budget workshop. Am I on the right?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Now for accounting for dummies, which is me, at the bottom of 2020, so you have a net, with the stimulus money, you were looking at about $480,000 in net revenue with the stimulus money. Is that, am I right?
With the stimulus money. Yeah, we're projected to lose, which is on page 3, nearly $9 million this year if I didn't have that CARES Act provider relief funding.
But with the CARES Act, we're going to be plus about 480. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And
based on how we're amortizing it, we chose to amortize it into 2021 based upon the current guidance of how we're allowed to attribute shortfalls and COVID-related expenses that go through June of 2021. So we felt it was reasonable to reallocate our monies. So we're booking $9.8 million in 2020.
Okay, and then
it also allows us to be conservative in case there is a payback, which, you know, again, I've noted we don't plan on having to pay any of that monies back.
Okay, so then going right to the exact to the right of that in 2021, if everything goes according to plan, things go back more to normal, you're projecting about 7.8 in net revenue. Is that correct?
That is correct. With the 4.3 million in CARES Act monies, yes, okay. That we received all in 2020.
Okay. The additional 4,000, Mr. Boyce, correct, that you're holding over. You're applying 2/3 to 2020 and holding 1/3 over for 2021.
That is correct. Yeah.
And Mr. Bostancic, that would put them in parity. Look at their budgeted 2020 net income. Mm-hmm. If you would add the additional 4 million, that would bring it up to the 7.8 as referenced in the budget.
Thank you. No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll conclude the Worcester Community Hospital appropriations budget for 2020, and we'll move now to the City of Worcester. I'll have a brief introduction and then go through the different commentary introductions, but again, want to compliment the mayor, the administration, the finance team for putting together another spectacular budget presentation for council's review, consideration, and approval. We have a very systematic and transparent approach. The performance, even during the COVID crisis, has been nothing short of remarkable. And most of that is derived. There has been a decrease in revenue, but certainly not like we've seen with the hospital. You know, it's not really apples to apples comparison, but also the finite expense control being nearly $3.5 million below budget really highlights the frugality and the conservatism of the Worcester administration and all of the operating personnel within the city without sacrificing the level of service that is expected by our citizens. I think that we have a very sound budget for 2021 and one that is achievable and reasonable and realistic. We do have expenditures significantly less than projected revenues, somewhere in the $1.5 million range, $1.6 million range, and significant capital investment continuing in our infrastructure, in utilities improvement forecasted. And we know we have some flexibility there in 2021 should things become more challenging and discerning. So again, very positive. I want to thank Andre and Sarah Lynn and the team. We received our adjustments this weekend, personally delivered. I don't know who delivered them, but they did arrive at the doorstep, and I hope council has time. They were de minimis in their impact, but again, took the old pages out, put the new pages in. So thank you for making those last minute minor modification or tweaks to our package. But again, I'll highlight before I turn it over to Mr. Dordia for his commentary. The 2021 budget has a projected revenue of a little over $26 million, total expenditures about $24.3 million, with a carryover of about $1.7 million. Capital projects, $4.8 million contribution for capital investments and projects, and that will move our rainy day fund from 175 to 175, where we're looking at budgeted for this year versus the forecast is higher than that this year because we have controlled expenses so aggressively. But we are going to put some capital in our capital fund that will reduce our rainy day fund from a budgeted allocation perspective to about 174 days, which is a very comfortable operating range for any city. So we're proud of that. The numbers continue to resonate the strength, the financial strength of our city without significant or any impact to the service levels that we're providing our citizens. So well done, thank you. And with that, I'll put the floor to Mr. Dordia to give a top level review as I've summarized, and we can move into more detailed discussion. Mr. Dordia?
Thank you. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, it goes without saying that this has been a very unusual year, not only from the COVID standpoint, from a financial perspective as well. If you would have told me that my revenue forecast would be 1.3% under budget from with all what went on, I would say that you had to be crazy, but that's indeed what happened. Very interesting that if you look at the forecast versus what we budgeted, we're actually very fortunate to be coming in about $350,000 under budget, or 1.3%. Now, I just want to hit up some of these highlights, like you said, on why this happened. On the negative side, something called our charges for services. They were down about 23%, or $326,000. And that's just because of most of our activities were canceled during the summer, and so all those charges for services never happened. The other thing that really hammered us pretty good was interest income. If you paid attention to the interest rate environment, the Fed cut short-term rates nearly zero. So our interest rate revenue actually probably got cut in about half, so that will impact us about $235,000. So on a brighter note, however, the state of Ohio rebated our 2019 workers' comp premium, and then they issued a dividend, or they are issuing a dividend this month. And I believe the dividend is like 396% of that premium. So all told, I believe will be about $900,000 to the good in a miscellaneous revenue category. And you can see that if you look at your budget packet on page 2-6 under the 2020 forecast column, which should be the fourth column in. Miscellaneous income is the last bit of income, and normally it's last because it's usually the smallest. That and the grant is sometimes, but we were looking at about budgeting for about $55,000, and we're going to have about $904,000. So anyway, it's pretty amazing that happened, and we're very fortunate and very happy that happened. So that's on the revenue side, and I'm talking forecasted budget 2020. So staying on that same category for the forecast versus what we had budgeted in 2020, I just want to highlight on the other side of the ledger, the expense side. So what we had budgeted about, about 23.7 million, approximately. You can see down there that for our operating expenditures, we're going to come in a lot lower, about just about $19.3 million. And there's two reasons for that. First and foremost, the mayor and Joel, they would always implore us and management and everyone to stick to our core value of one of them of stewardship and spend wisely. As Scott said, you got to skinny up. So we obviously tried to do that. And the other side was actually the other three sides of this. The second component was that we had some of our programs that we couldn't do. In other words, we couldn't do 100% of our pool. You didn't see the soccer programs, the basketball programs, the field house. There's just a lot of activities that didn't take place. And we also did not we have higher seasonal and part-time employees. We did not hire part-time seasonal this year as well. So anyway, long story short, that happened. And then lo and behold, the federal government passes the CARES Act. So the CARES Act isn't a grant. What it does is it actually reduced our expenditures. So in several categories. So thanks to about $2 million in CARES Act monies, our expenditures are down. So overall, we're down about $4.5 million in expenditures there because of those three reasons. Speaking of the CARES Act funds have to be, and they will be spent by December 30th of this year. And unless our federal government does something else, I have incorporated zero CARES Act funding in the 2021 budget. So that is the whole. So 2020 is a very unusual year. I've never seen anything like this. Okay, as far from a financial viewpoint, I've never seen our expenses down, like almost 20%. It's just unheard of. Let's see. So, as John said, we're going to actually end up, because of all those, pretty decent year for 2020. Looking at 2020 forecast versus 2021 budget for the general fund. Our largest category of revenue is obviously taxes. In that category, we have lumped in there income tax, which is about 75% of our budget, and then we get about $2.5 million in property taxes. So between property and income, it's about 82% of our revenue budget. So I'm forecasting about a 1.9% increase next year. So that's fairly conservative, but not too out of the ordinary, I would say. We too are forecasting, like the hospital, that maybe come second quarter, there'll be a lot more normalcy there. So the other thing is and I'm comparing, because this is such a crazy year with COVID, the CARES funds, etc. If you look at our 2021 budget is very similar to what we proposed in 2020. It's a 2.5% increase, budget to budget. I normally don't go budget to budget, but because 2020 was just, I guess, an absolutely very unusual year, I am using budget to budget from this perspective, but it's 2.5%. And if you recall, I think wages increases were 2.5%. And then, Joel, I think our health care went up about 4.5%. Is that right? Okay. And then we normally budget about 2% for inflation for the O&M pieces. So that's what I wanted to say about that, the general fund. The other thing I want to say about the general fund is, again, we're as far as programming or anything else, and Joel can speak this as well, but there's not a whole lot. We're planning on running 2021 as a normal year. And we're not adding, if there's anything new, other than I believe you see that we did discuss the potential to have one more in the safety forces if one of our maybe want a resource officer. But that's just a budget. It's not obviously a given. So I guess I would, John, how do you want to do this? You want to take questions at the end?
Yep. Yeah. Andre, thank you for that. It was so important to explain the impact of the CARES Act. And I think we all understand the plus 2 million offsetting our operating expenses and the positive impact that had on our overall performance based on the 2020 forecast versus budget. It was an anomaly, a year that hopefully won't be repeated. And we should remain very optimistic that we'll maintain our momentum in 2021. On the revenue side, certainly, all of the employers are back at full force within the city, which is positive, and hopefully that can be sustained. And our expenses will return to normalcy next year without the CARES subsidy, and you've got that reflected in the budget. So I think they're very reasonable in terms of your assumption, and it's a good plan as we go forward. And we're just going to have to deal month to month in 2021 with managing our expenses and council's review of proposed expenditures, et cetera. But again, you're very fiscally conscious in terms of your management, your conservatism, as you highlight, Andre, and that's a very reassuring and positive thing. Yeah, with that, I would like, before we take some comments that may have been streaming in, allow Councilman Myers and Councilman Sanders to have some input as the other representatives of the Finance Committee. Mr. Myers, please.
All right. Thank you, John. Yeah, as I went through the budget in some detail this past weekend, I saw really nothing out of the ordinary. It's. I mean, I know it's been an extraordinary year, but looking forward, the budget looks as it has for the last 7 years that I've been a part of this process. I would guess I would like to see, or perhaps if we need to go mid-year or something, I think the one full-time equivalent addition for the police department might be a little light. I know that in the document he referenced potential resource officers for this hospital or the school. I'm just, my gut feel is we're going to probably end up getting at least those two requests, potentially more, but especially for the school system. I think we just cross that bridge when we come to it. And again, that would be the only thing I noted that I thought might be under budgeted slightly, anticipating maybe needing to add more to that force. So thank you, John. I don't have any further questions this evening.
Thank you, Scott. Mr. Sanders?
Well, Mr. Ansel, no, I have similar comments or similar thoughts to Mr. Meyer. I mean, going through this, there's nothing that jumps out at me as extraordinary. The only thing that's extraordinary is the fact that as ordinary as it is in light of everything that went on in 2020. So that's reassuring all the way around. And I guess a quick question to Andre. You said we budgeted 2% on healthcare. It went up 4%. Was there a specific event or just general price increase that drove the extra 2%?
So it was 4.5%. So the wage increases were 2.5%, and then on our healthcare portion, that would be 4.5%. And since we're in with the group Borma, that was their projection for the entire group for 2021. And Joel, you can. Okay,
so it wasn't due to any one specific event or specific group of events that created the additional.
Correct.
And actually, if you don't mind, we were looking at we always look at what's going on in the industry, and they were talking double-digit increases. And in some other entities I have seen, it was in the 16 to 20% range. You know, we weren't looking at that high, but the industry was in that range for similar entities as us. And so when we were looking at our rate with Borma, that was actually a pleasant surprise that we were able to keep it that low, because that was the whole point of Borma, was to spread that risk out over all of the entities as opposed to absorbing that ourselves.
You know, along those lines, I want to highlight that in our business, our healthcare expenses for next year went up 11%. And that was with no major issues, just the standard non-catastrophic healthcare expenses. It certainly is turning into a major challenge for any public sector or private sector enterprise. It has the potential of being the fastest growing expense line item in your budget, unfortunately. But it is what it is, and to have a 4% increase against an industry baseline is nothing short of exceptional. So continue the healthy lifestyles and the good work maintaining our self-funded cooperative. I do want to highlight too, before we take some public comments, that this process is one of the most significant and detailed processes that we're engaged with on City Council. And the administration and the combined review and engagement by council represents hundreds of hours of work, and to have the detail that we have is exceptional. And I really, really want to commend the administration for our breakout sessions that we have with 2 council representatives each, so we don't violate the sunshine laws. We can't meet more than 2 elected officials at a time. And we spent a couple of hours in each session, time all of the council members. It's a good, we get the budget, we're able to digest it, that we're able to come into our breakout sessions and spend a couple of hours of quality time with Q&A. The questions that are generated by other council members are, shared discreetly among the administration. They're the clearinghouse, so we're not in violation. And it really is an effective process. And we've been doing it now for a couple years, and it really enhances the process and makes it much more efficient as each of the council representatives has time to analyze. And they all have, because of their different committee responsibilities, kind of have different focus points. And the breakout sessions allows the council members to really have Q&A associated with those functional areas of assignment through our committee structure. So it's a great process. I don't know if other municipalities engage in a similar process, but it's very, very helpful. And I hope other members of council concur with that and agree with that. So with that, before we open it to the rest of council, Mr. Scavelli, are there any relevant questions pertaining to the 2021 appropriations budget?
There are, Mr. Ansel. I will go ahead and read those to you now. This is from Desiree Weber, and she says, what is the largest category of increased expenditure in the police department budget over the last 10 years? An increase of 43 to 51 million. Is that salary increases or tech and training costs?
Well, the largest expense, Mr. Doherty or Mr. Montgomery, would be payroll expenses associated with the employment of our safety service personnel. So, Mr. Montgomery?
That's correct. And since we're looking at the 2021 budget, I guess I can speak to 2020 versus 2021. And I think across the entire safety services, police and fire, it's a 3.3% increase. And the majority of that would be attributed to personnel and not adding personnel, other than potential one that we talked about for police, and the healthcare costs. That's the primary thing. I think as far as the police department went, their actual O&M, operations and maintenance, just for them between 2020 budget and 2021 was almost exactly the same. They were projecting about exactly the same as they were for the previous year.
Good.
Did I hear you say 50 million?
I don't know.
That didn't sound right to me, Andre.
Oh, no. Yeah, read that again.
Yeah, our total safety services budget, personnel, non police and fire was 14.8 million. So
Yeah, that's my point. This year, I think the police budget, they'll spend overall about 5.8 million. That'll be about 4.9 for personnel costs and probably, I don't know, 750 to 800,000 in O&M. And then their vehicles will run about 100,000 for vehicle maintenance, approximately.
Yeah.
But that'll get you to about, I think, 5.8 million overall.
I think they added a digit on
Like
there.
zero? Okay.
Yeah, they added a
Yeah.
zero.
Our general fund budget's our operating budget is 24.4 million. So.
Right.
All right.
Well, the response would be that 80% is salary and wages in terms of the
absolutely.
expense for the safety services. Mr. Scavelli, another question?
Yes, we do have more questions. So this next question is going to be from, I believe, Michelle Libby, and she wants to know, first of all, if there is any, let's see, I got to find the right one here because there's just tons of them that came through. She wants to know what the difference is between wards on capital spending. So she says she sees it as disparity between wards and capital spending, and she wants to know what the explanation for that is, besides just population size and geographic size, if any.
Joel, I'll let you highlight, but let me just a lot of that is based on age and condition of ward maintenance. The higher expense wards are older wards requiring more maintenance. The newer, less funded wards are newer and less maintenance. There's a direct correlation between old and new. Mr. Montgomery?
And that's exactly right. And the other factors, there's two main factors. One, like you said, older wards, tend to need more attention. But second, it depends on a specific project. Every year or two, we do a large project, like the streetscape downtown is a large project for us. So that would be a Ward 1. We did a West Highland this year, and even though we might have gotten 500,000 in grant money, that still shows it as an expense. And that would be in a different ward. So we're doing a sludge tank at the wastewater plant right now, which is $2 million. So that would show up when you're just looking at location as a Ward 1 type of thing. So that could change somewhat drastically year to year, just depending on a specific project that we might be working on in that particular year. When we built the water tower up off of Melrose, that would have been, a couple $1 million that would have shown up, at the north end of town. So it just depends on the project and, like you said, the age of the infrastructure.
And all of that is detailed, quite, transparent on the capital improvement infrastructure forecast over the next 5 to 6, 7 years. So the details there. Yeah, Mr. Dordia?
One last item to consider. So a lot of grants, at least that Jonathan does for CDBG, are based on census data. So some of those grants are census data driven, typically LMI in nature.
Yeah. So
Good question.
Yep. So you might see it absolutely would be skewed a little bit towards areas of the city that might tend to be more LMI, because that's where the grant money is available to do those projects.
Yeah, good question.
Right. Mr. Scavelli?
Yes, hopefully this one's a quick one. Again, from Ms. Libby, is there an itemized report on where the funds were spent or the CARES Act funds were spent?
Yeah, I think I missed. Is there a what report?
Is there an itemized report
Yeah.
individually showing the CARES Act
Absolutely.
expenditures? Okay. And then Ms. Libby also asks, How much CARES Act funding was used for direct mortgage, rental, utility payments, etc., assistance for city residents?
We couldn't use the funding for that in terms of our allocated amount. Unfortunately, it wasn't one of the buckets, if you will, or one of the categories that they allowed municipal funding for CARES Act receipts. So not permissible by the state of Ohio or the federal government.
The next question is from Desiree Weber, and it says, what justifies the almost 10-to-1 ratio of city expenditures on safety services versus public health and social services, 14 million versus 132,000 in 2020 on page 35?
Here's
Mr. Montgomery or Andre, I'll let you talk
Yeah,
about
here's
that.
what I can answer that. That item there is what we pay the Wayne County for health department services. That's our allocation. So they bill all the entities in Wayne County for the cost of the health department, and that's our cost. So I'm not sure. Maybe somebody was a great negotiator.
It might be a misunderstanding of the line item. That line item is for the health department. I will say, I can say this, we spend quite a bit on what I would consider social services. Our transportation program, which primarily benefits, our low to moderate income. We spent 500,000 on that last year. We budgeted for another 500,000 or more this year. We just last year, you guys approved spending 100,000 of CDBG money towards the homeless shelter downtown, over the next 3 years. And we contributed, a small amount to the severe weather shelter, that cost them about 10,000 to run that in any given year. So we do budget and spend some money on, especially the transportation programs.
Transportation services, especially, that's a significant line item, subsidy.
Right.
And John.
Yes,
well,
Mr. Myers.
It is a little bit misleading to compare those two lines of the budget because the one she referenced, the larger number, that is predominantly salaries for fire and police departments. And although that's not necessarily a social service directly, that's what city municipalities are in the business of providing. That's why we pay the taxes, and those are the services that we are in the business of providing. Although the city does donate, like you said, to the Salvation Army shelter, the transportation, there are other agencies in our that are this business that local government generally is tasked with doing, at least as a percentage of their total income from tax revenues.
Correlates with the prior question regarding salary and wages associated with safety service staff, of course. Mr. Montgomery?
Yeah, there's one other connection there, and that's a partnership between our police and our CIT trained officers, the critical incident training they have with our social services. They partner, they ride along, they go together, they work quite well together when it comes to calls. So that's not something we itemize out, but there's hundreds of man hours spent every year where they're working together, our officers with them. And there was a great article in the paper back in July, I think it was called Tackling Crisis Together. And a lot of feedback from our social service agencies 180 about the great job that our officers do in those situations and how they work together. So that's sort of a uncaptured dollar amount or value that we do provide in working with those agencies.
Thank you, Joel. Mr. Scavelli, another couple relevant issues. Can you kind of prioritize?
Yeah, I can. I think this one here I can answer probably myself real quick, but I do want to bring it up. Just because it was asked. So there's also a question about the decrease in the public health and social services in the next 3 years. I'm assuming those are just, again, the costs that are given to us by the health department. And so that would not be something that we would be in complete control over based off of what Mr. Doherty had described before. Next, then we have, we have questions about the school resource officer, and that's in the budgets. And the question is, who exactly in the school administration made the request for an additional school resource officer?
Mr. Montgomery?
I don't, I don't know that we've had a specific request, but we're always having conversations. The school and our police department are always having discussions about the needs, and in those discussions between them and the hospital, it was apparent we just wanted to keep that option open if that were to come up. Fact of the matter is, we're still down about 5 officers. It's going to take us quite a while to just fill those, before we even get to some of the resource officer allocation.
And
Thank you.
really, both operations, the schools and the hospital, it's the CEO that's mentioned it to us each time, saying we may be in need of a resource officer or an increase in those. So we're taking direction from them, and as far as all of those comments go. So.
And that's the beauty of a budget. We can put it as a placeholder and it can be reviewed and considered. And if it is formally requested, at least we have some appropriations available where we can support that request. But please, everyone understand, it isn't a commitment to spend, it's an allocation for future potential needs. So it's a budget. It's not an expenditure hard and firm. So very good point. Mr. Scavelli?
I think that honestly, right now, I think those are the only questions left. There is one other question that I'm not really sure that I understand. I have asked, it's from Ms. Weber. I have asked her to go ahead and reach out to me on another issue. So I'll just tell her right now, please give me a call and we can discuss that issue at a later date, because I don't really think I can really articulate it properly right now. So other than that, I think those are all the questions we have right now.
Well, thank you, Mr. Scavelli, for being an effective clearinghouse, and thank you, public input questions out there. Those are always healthy. We want to clarify to help improve your understanding of our dynamics within the city's financial management. Mr. Dordia.
May I just use about 4 minutes to talk about the capital fund for a minute?
Please.
Okay, so we've got $2.5 million budgeted in grants for receipts this year. 1 million are from new grants from 2021, and $1.5 million are carried over from 2020 to 21. I just want to point that out. So there's 2.5 in total, but if you look at the summary page, you'll see there's a reduction of $1 million from grants. That's the difference. The second thing I did want to point out is that we have 5.2 million infrastructure spending, infrastructure equipment and vehicles. And again, as somebody articulated, there's no military equipment in this budget. Although I tried to get a patch from the finance department, but that was turned down. We're also proposing this year to use $4.8 million transfer from the general fund to the capital fund to fund capital. Now, this is very important. I want to go over this quickly with you. So if you look back from 2001 until 2008, which I believe is 8 years, we averaged just under $1.2 million a year in capital transfers from general funds or capital fund, okay? 1.2 million. Well, along came the Great Recession, right? So 2009, we transferred 118,000. 2010, we transferred 83,000. 2011, we transferred 74,000. So 2012, we transferred just under 1.4 million. 2013, it was about 2.1 million. Went to the voters and said, hey, if you approve a tax increase, we'll commit to at least doing half what revenues we generate from that tax increase for about $2.5 million a year. So come 2014 through 2020, we've averaged $4 million in transfers. That's $27,850,000 since 2014. So that, again, is part of the core value of trust, one of our core values. We said we would do that, and we did far and above that. I just want to make sure that I pointed that out.
Mr. Doherty, I want to thank you for that historical recap. And there are a couple members of council that were serving at that point in time, and it was a very challenging and difficult time to manage through. And now we're back to rebuilding our capital fund that allows us to make those multi-million-dollar infrastructure improvements that will serve our citizens for decades to come. And before, the well was running dry as it related to capital fund transfers. So we're back catching up, as you so well put it, in a very strong position. So with that, we've got about 5 minutes. Any other comments from members of council? I'll open the floor. Thank you for being attentive this evening. Ms. Warden?
I have one comment or question, and perhaps it's not entirely serious, but I wonder if there's any money in the budget for next year for Mr. Doherty to have a new audio system, because I cannot understand it at all.
They need to upgrade their city's laptops, I think. I think that's Mr. Myers was having problems with his. So, yeah, Andre, you were breaking up a bit.
Oh, sorry. I'll work on that. I'm very frugal. I have one of these little, I don't know, $25 camera and microphone system. So I'll splurge for that. Sorry.
Any other comments? We have about 4 minutes. Mr. Silvestri, please.
Yes, I just want to thank Andre and the rest of the finance team. I want to thank Sarah Lynn for sitting in this evening, and also the entire administration. I really gained a lot of insight and extra detail, extra knowledge about the budget in our session, the breakout session that you so accurately summarized, Mr. Ansel. So very well done. There was a lot that went into the budget. There were questions that I had, and I got all those answered. So I just want to thank the administrative team for all the hours they put in to make sure that our dollars are wisely spent for our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback, Mr. Silvestri. Anyone else? We'll conclude the Finance Committee meeting this evening. Thank you, public, for your input. Thank you, council, for your preparation. And most importantly, thank you, city administrators, for an outstanding effort and a very cohesive and concise presentation and Q&A period. So you've done your work. You've delivered again. Thank you very, very much. Meeting adjourned. Now, John, can